Hello chess friends, this is National Master Paul Agron, and today I would like to talk to you about things surrounding calculation. Specifically, I would like to talk to you about tactics and why we miss tactics, or why we, underperform. So in some sense, I'd like to talk about the sins of calculating tactics at various levels of chess erudition. Too often we lose games or do not realize winning positions because of poor calculation. And while it's difficult to improve one's overall chess understanding, it is especially frustrating when we miss tactics that we know we should have seen at our level of play. So what are some of the reasons we don't see tactics? Well, there are probably too many, but the typical answers to these questions are not calculating deeply enough, not calculating widely enough, so not considering enough moves. Then there are errors in calculation where we don't visualize the resulting positions clearly enough, or we see what chess players call ghosts. And sometimes we get overly enchanted with our investment. So I've invested so much in a given calculation or a given line, I can't let go of it, and I keep re-examining the lines over and over and keep on looking at the calculations that I already have conducted without potentially considering other possibilities. There are also emotional reasoning or emotional reasons for missing calculations. Some of them are reasons around trusting your opponent, for example. Things like I'm playing a much stronger player and they wouldn't miss a simple tactic. No, they wouldn't. And basically, simple tactics show up everywhere, and people at all levels of play miss simple tactics. And so it's basically one should approach calculations in situations where one plays stronger opponent or a difficult opponent with a cool head. Okay, another reason why people miss tactics is they get attracted to what I call shiny things or fancy tactics, and basically not considering simpler variations. Sometimes, there are people, especially with a certain style of play, where they really go for complicated variations and basically don't consider simple tactics or simple calculations as tactics. That's a mistake. And finally, there are problems with what I call accounting. This is where people forget lines that they've already calculated, along with the conclusions that they've made about the lines that they've already calculated. And so they either go about recalculating the lines and rediscovering the lines they've already considered, and that takes a lot of time, or they forget about the calculations altogether. So these things are problematic. And so it's important to have a system of tracking your calculations, right? So I would like to give you a few examples today of such thinking and such mistakes, along with hopefully some recipes. Of course, it's impossible to fix everything in one lecture, but hopefully I can give you some pointers on how to maybe approach these things at various levels of play. So let's look at this position. First, let's notice that this is a complex position full of tactical possibilities, and that white has initiative here because his rooks are nicely vertically lined up. The black king is kind of stuck in the center a little bit, and we even have some possibilities for checking. So it is very, very typical to examine checks. So we could examine a check like this. And there are really a couple of possibilities. One is to interfere with a check with either one of the rooks, and the other is for the king to kind of walk over. And after some calculations of the form rook takes and black takes, we would love to deliver this check on the back rank, except that the queen can capture our queen. So that's not really a good idea. So we quickly realize that. right? So we go back in our mind, but we might be wondering, what if, after this calculation, what if black kind of interposed with a rook, and we have a number of captures in place? But should we examine this variation? We have already determined that there is nothing to be gathered with best play from black. And yet we might be really tempted to examine variations like this. And well, there's of course some captures which are suboptimal for black, but there is this check that we could give, and white could basically bring the king over. And there's another check. And oops, like if we went to f2, there is a check with a capture of the d pawn, so we really reject this variation. So really the king should go back here, and then we should check again. And what happens if the king marches all the way back? And we could really calculate for a long time. And this is really very complex, and really, we could eventually come to a conclusion that there's nothing to be gained from this calculation. But why did we start this calculation to begin with? Because we determined that previously determined that after the check, king over here, there's nothing to be gained, right? So we shouldn't engage in an additional calculation after we determined that there is a good variation for black. So let's examine some additional possibilities. What if we might really be excited about, for example, capturing the rooks? So what about this? And maybe can I pin? No. That would basically result in a loss. So really you can't pin here. But maybe I could actually capture, and black captures, and I capture this pawn. Very exciting. So I capture the pawn, and black king comes up. And is there anything to do here? How about like checking black king? That brings nothing. Black king just comes down. No. How about just actually capturing a pawn? Well, it's easy to see that this results in a perpetual, because white king comes up and we check, and the king comes down and we check. This really doesn't deliver anything. King comes down here. So it's easy to see that this brings nothing, absolutely nothing. But we could get stuck over here and kind of look for possibilities, because really the board is open and there are lots and lots of moves for the queen. So how about, remember that idea with pinning the rook? How about if we play a very natural move? We know that it's very natural to pin the rook, right? Or I should say to pin an attack piece. And the rook is attacked, so it's very natural to do this. Well, we might be discouraged from examining it because it seems like black might have a lot of moves. Yet it's a fairly forcing move, isn't it? Because it requires, we have like 3 attackers on the rook, but there is a way for the queen to defend. Or is there? So we kind of stare at it for a while. Yeah, I mean, the queen defends and everything is great, except we ask ourselves a question whether the queen can stay on this diagonal. And really, we kind of find that it can't, right? We find that there is a way to dispatch the queen away from the diagonal and to just win, because there isn't really much. So, yeah, looks like we found a tactic. Congratulations. So what do we learn from this? We learn that we should examine probably natural moves first, and that we do not need to recalculate possibilities for which our opponent has good moves. So here is another very interesting position. There are opposite colored bishops on the board, and there are weaknesses in white's camp. And what do we know about opposite colored bishops? We know that it's almost like having an extra piece for whichever side it is. And in this case, white's light square bishop is a fairly bad piece, hitting his own pawn. So it's almost like having an extra piece for black, except that white actually has an extra piece. White has an extra knight, and white is about to take the pawn on the queen side and to push his own a-pawn, or to try to queen his own a-pawn. And on these merits alone, white, unless black can somehow checkmate white, white is going to win. So, but there are some back rank weaknesses that we could still try to exploit. And here, white is actually quite a bit a higher rated player. So we might just resign here as black because white has an extra piece and seemingly no checkmate for black. And really, well, but let's try to calculate this a little bit. What if we brought the rook here with the idea to exploit the back rank and to threaten checkmate, and to possibly, by the way, this is also a clearance move because it enables us to potentially bring our bishop back, for example, and to line up the queen and to maybe threaten some, with some checkmating possibilities. Okay, so here it seems white has some ways to defend. So how about this check? And after, for example, a fairly interesting and good move, good retreating move by the bishop, we simply go here. And if, well, so there is no point to attack the back rank anymore for black. So black could line up like this. But remember, we have an extra piece, so we could sacrifice a pawn. And, if the pawn were to be taken and queens were to be exchanged, white is simply winning with his extra piece, with best play. So that doesn't seem to work. And we can conduct this type of calculation very quickly. And by the way, there's yet another way to defend the back rank for white in this position. White could simply, for example, take the pawn. And when the rook comes down here, the rook is very nicely defended by white. Queen, like this. Okay, and white is simply winning. So this doesn't seem to work. So, should we resign? I think we owe ourselves to examine the position a little bit because the dark squares are quite weak. And so we should really calculate widely and consider every single possibility. And we notice that there are only 2 pawns protecting the white king. So there might be some destructive sacrifices, however unlikely they are. So there's this meta pattern in chess about taking the opponent's worst piece. Right? Sometimes in highly tactical possibilities, try to take the opponent's worst piece. And the opponent's worst piece is, at the moment, the light-squared bishop. So what if we considered it, right? I mean, it actually has some merit. So if we took the bishop, well, I mean, if the rook were to take, except that he doesn't have to take yet. But if the rook were to take, we have the checkmate in the back rank. Okay, so, but we should also calculate an intermezzo like this with the queen. The queen could actually check, and we could bring the bishop back, counterattacking the queen. And, oh, the rook is kind of hanging. Okay, so that's a problem, right? I mean, the queen could actually take the bishop with check, but then we have queen against 2 minors, which is likely winning. So let's actually demonstrate it here. Queen takes, for example, takes. Well, so now rook can take, except that I take the d pawn, and I'm going to take most likely the other pawn, and maybe even win the knight. And so, this clearly favors black. So no need to calculate further, right? So queen taking doesn't really do anything. So the queen should actually go back and defend the rook. And after rook takes rook, we have an excellent position. So as black, we stop our calculation here. There is no reason to consider any additional moves. We should just play the moves because this is the best possibility that we have. So we should try to examine, remember, we need to calculate accurately without errors. So we should examine all possibilities. So let's do this again. Bishop takes. Now, what if, okay, so we've realized that queen check is not really great. What if queen just takes pawn? So this is interesting. So here we could, of course, for example, just take the rook. Queen takes rook. Let's demonstrate it here. And after queen takes rook, well, we could win the pawn. So we kind of calculate this possibility. Hey, this sort of works. Okay, but we didn't calculate all possibilities. We didn't yet calculate all possibilities because, so all of these positions, they assume that the rook cannot be taken, all right, by by anything, but the rook can be taken by this g pawn. And we destroyed the king's pawn cover. So destroying the king's pawn cover is better than resigning. So is black lost, or is there any juice in the position to continue the attack? And of course we should act quickly because there is this check on b2 coming, bringing white's queen to the action. So we should make a move that prevents the check. And yes, there is a threat for checkmate in 1 on d2, right? So we should make this move, or we should continue this with this idea in our calculations and see if there's any way we could maybe deliver perpetual, or, well, this is checkmate in 1 threat. And white king is awfully active. Oh, this is actually, there's no way to save the position. Wait, so let's trace our steps back a few moves. Turns out that we can actually take the bishop with impunity, right? And that the only way for white to continue is to bring the queen back, or to give a check and bring the queen back. Any of those possibilities are there. But white is losing the piece by force. And he's losing his worst piece. How amazing. Tactics are amazing. Okay, so let's say white were to capture the pawn. We could try to actually come in and again, so now that we're up, we won a piece, there's still weakness on dark squares. And of course, white could, basically defend his back rank in this fashion. We could capture the pawn and the game would continue. But actually, once we've calculated that we're just capturing a piece, we should just put the pieces on the board. We should make the move, and with the move on the board, continue our calculations, right? It is impossible to recapture the rook. The rook is untouchable, right? Okay, so this is the type of a process you might go through in positions where you're possibly playing a stronger opponent, where you have attacking possibilities, such as, for example, one of the interesting aspects of this position is the fact that we have 3 pieces attacking the king, right? And 2 of them are heavy pieces, and the dark squares are weakened. So this is a good omen that there might be something. And in such positions, we should just consider every possibility. We should keep no stone unturned, so to speak. And yes, I mean, this works because this is a destructive sacrifice. It destroys the king's pawn cover, and then it turns out that there is basically a checkmating possibility if the pawn recaptures. And if the rook recaptures, we have back rank problems, etc., etc. So white is forced to actually just defend the rook. Pretty amazing. So here I will finish today's lecture on chess tactics. Good luck in your games. Till next time.